Hello and welcome back to another episode of Gaming the System, the podcast where three intersectional feminists examine gaming and games through a feminist lens. I'm your host for today, I'm Jem, and I'm here with my friends Alex and Matt. So before we get started, if you want to support us, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/gamingthesystem for some exclusive content, or you can send us a one-off donation via PayPal to our email address, wearegamingthesystem@gmail.com. One thing I was wondering is what we think about how educational games, or games that are educational, and gamification as well, how they might support people and support equality. So make access to these games more across the board, more open, and also to help to deal with other issues of accessibility and other issues of diversity that we've talked about lots on this podcast. Just to put this into a bit of context, the research that's been done into educational gaming has found that it can be really, really positive for some types of personalities and in some types of environments, and that does vary. So they did find that women can sometimes be put off when it's a very competitive setup, when there's ranking going on or they're having to play against other people. I feel like that's a little bit of a stereotypical idea of how women work. So I put a massive caveat on that's just some research has said this. But there is definitely an element of, some people really enjoy that competitiveness, like you, Alex, were saying that you're really into completionism and getting all the trophies. So it really appeals to you. Whereas I know that other people find that actually, that sort of puts them off. They're like, oh no, I don't want to do that because it's just going to be too hard. It feels like an insurmountable mountain. And obviously there are different games and there are different ways of tackling those issues. But yeah, with that in mind, what are your thoughts on how gaming might improve accessibility to education?
Matt, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure.
So you're muted, Matt.
Oh, you're there.
Am I?
Yeah, you're just
can hear me.
Better. Yeah.
So it's I think the more ways there are to access information, the better, and the many different types of games there are many different ways that you can interact with people. So you could have the role of creativity in game design that is a spark that isn't necessarily present in most educational tools. There's a way to make people care about finding out the information, and that is having good storytelling, good writing, and you can have that. So you've got education in terms of gaining knowledge and education in terms of learning skills. And when it comes to learning skills, you don't necessarily need to build an entire game around a certain skill, but again, repetition if you're using maths, doing any kind of like carnival simulator or one of the Total War games where part of it is resource management. So in order for you to get to the thing that you want, you need to work out how to get there, and that makes you care and that makes you want to do it. And just it all just comes round to, we'll talk about this in the next episode with that news story, but how the deck is stacked against children, and it's stacked against parents, and it's stacked against teachers by the system of capitalism and patriarchy. But the more we're able to seize the means of production, as is happening with game design and with YouTube and with everything, it's giving more resources and opportunity to people that would otherwise not have been here 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex?
I can definitely speak about the barriers to education from a disabled perspective. There are many types of barriers to education. The education system is very ableist in its makeup. And that's, there's also the physical barriers of a physical school building itself. If your school or place of learning isn't accessible, then if you were able to learn remotely, perhaps gaming could be a way of facilitating some of that learning. Equally, if you think about the way children are taught, it's very much I hope it's changing now, but it's very much a neurotypical way of delivering. If you don't fit into this box like everyone else does, then you're going to be excluded or left behind. Or, when you get to extreme stages, kids are accused of being disruptive when actually they're just struggling to learn, because the information is not being given to them in a format they can work with, because their brains are just wired differently. Or they find a classroom environment too overstimulative or triggering for some of, the symptoms that they're going through. So there's lots of barriers to education in that way. So, and I know that I was just trying to think of how to word it. When I was between jobs after I'd left sixth form, one of the LSA's learning support assistants that I used to work a lot with said, we've got a student who's autistic and is really struggling to learn Latin because he keeps getting distracted in class. And because they knew I'd done Latin up to A-level and was looking for work, they were like, if you can come in and support them and help them to focus on looking at the vocab they're supposed to be learning, we'll offer to pay you for the time that you come in for. So I went in for like 10 hours, I think, over the course of, a couple of weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, depending on when the lessons were. And did my best to assist, but they were much more interested in doodling in their workbook and drawing swords and mushrooms and talking about swords and mushrooms and their special interests, I guess. But no, they were absolutely lovely, and I could tell that they were obviously at least vaguely interested in the subject a little, and steering them on to thinking about it was tricky, because obviously I didn't know. I had absolutely no experience of that kind of thing. I was only 19ish, but it was interesting to kind of think about ways to focus in on the things that we were supposed to be picking up in class, and definitely does make you think about different ways of teaching and getting that information across, and whether gamification could be a way of actually getting those messages across in a neurodivergent way for people who are neurodivergent to pick it up and run with it, that kind of thing. So I don't know whether gaming would be an answer, but I'm sure it's probably overlapping a little with this story that we're going to cover in a future episode. But I definitely think that some of the ways that stuff is taught in schools is not right for everybody, and there are definitely different ways of doing it. So I think gaming can help to some degree, definitely.
Yeah, I think you raised some really interesting points there, and it's always you always have such insightful comments, Alex. I really appreciate it, and I think that educational games can provide as we said, a sort of support to an education system that needs to be more fair than it currently is. And I speak from personal experience within my family of how difficult the education system is for anyone who just isn't in a very narrow band of what is classed as the average child, and you have to fight for it then every step of the way, and it's really difficult to watch somebody who wants to learn be unable to learn because the system is set up in such a way that it actually obstructs that is just really hard. And I think it's really interesting for me because I'm now training at teaching at higher education. So obviously it's a very different situation there because you've got people who supposedly are, keen to be there and very engaged and interested in the subject, but you still have people who have all sorts of barriers to accessing that learning, and it's up to us as teachers to support that and to provide and to find ways to help them to access that information. And I think that doesn't change wherever you are within the learning journey. I think that's important along the way, and I think games provide a really positive and interesting way to explore that. And I think it would be really good to see more games that can teach people whatever you think they need teaching. And I think that's something that you're touching on, Matt, is like, what is it that we should be teaching people? What is it that people need to be learning? But what if we could work that out, then I think computer games is definitely, well, not just computer games, because some of my gaming recommendations are not computer games, they're card games. But I think it does provide an opportunity for people to access it, and as I said, some research has shown that people can find it quite challenging when it's competitive, but other research has shown that the people that benefit the most from it are the introverts. They enjoy the gaming, perhaps because it doesn't feel so in your face, perhaps because it doesn't require that interpersonal interaction, which if you're in school all day, it can be quite challenging if you have any of those sort of social anxieties. Yeah. So I think that's really interesting. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on what's the sort of your recommendation or your favourite educational game that you've come across in your travels.
I touched on it earlier. I think my favourites have been the Assassin's Creed games, and they've definitely evolved in the way that they educate because they're actively providing a separate sort of standalone game. The discovery tours in the most recent ones. So you have discovery tours for Origins, that's ancient Egypt, Odyssey, ancient Greece, and Valhalla, which is Vikings invading England. I forget the exact period. But yeah, that time period where you had invasions in England with the Anglo-Saxons as well. But yeah, so they've deliberately made the choice to separate that element out and provide it as a separate sort of offering. And they have actually marketed it to schools and done partnerships with museums for exhibitions that are based around, those discovery tours and those games as well. I think there was an exhibition in, I've forgotten the name of the museum, but it's in Oxford. No, it's gone. And they had an exhibition on Greek something. See, my brain is still working this evening as well. But yeah, it was very much tied into Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and I could be completely wrong about which museum it was, so please don't quote me. But I definitely remember there being an exhibition which involved Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and it was partnered with, I I think it was Hampshire Museums Trust, now that I think of it, because it was relatively local, which was really cool. So yeah, there's definitely, that is a really good example of how that particular franchise has integrated very heavily into actual educational places such as museums and schools to deliver like actual lessons on these time periods where the kids could even go in VR as well, and experience it that way, which is really cool. So that's one I would recommend. But even the older Assassin's Creed games, obviously, being in the settings that they were, you'd go around and find all the collectibles, or you'd come across the buildings and be able to read about them at length in the inventory menus and the guides within the menus, which I spent an awful lot of time doing. And if you go and approach somebody else who's played the game, they wouldn't even have spent a second looking at it, because that's not what they're interested in. But it's there if anyone wants it, which is what I like, is that choice. And I think if that was a choice in more games, it would be really cool. But obviously it fits in with the Assassin's Creed kind of narrative, being going back in time. So yeah, that's one I would recommend.
That's awesome. I think that your point about museums kind of getting on board or getting involved with games is a really interesting idea, and it's a shame we don't see that happening more. I know that in some museums they're using the sort of virtual reality stuff more, but it's almost like what we need is a hookup between some of the big games companies and some of the big museums, or the big I don't know, NASA or some, whatever, just as so that you can kind of get some serious funding, but also education. And what I've been learning, quite shockingly over the last few months, is that education is not a simple thing. We have some really good research on how people learn and why people learn and how we teach, and so you need to apply that to these things. It's not just, oh, we can just add in these few little things and it becomes educational. There are clever and interesting ways that we can do that I think we could be looking to actually set up proper partnerships where there is a proper approach to it. What do you think, Matt?
I think one game that I've enjoyed is the Talos Principle, and the sequel's just come out, and it's all philosophy, and there's an extent to which it's easy to get sick of philosophy after a little bit, but it does a good job of just presenting the nature of philosophy and existentialism, and but then again, you think it's teaching philosophy. All of the classical philosophers were old men sitting atop republics of empires built upon slavery and war, and so they sit there and you think, oh, Marcus Aurelius has such incredible wisdom to tell us, when he was an emperor of an empire, and he's talking about, oh, he who has knowledge is only truly free. And you go, well, what about women? What about slaves? What about peasants? All of that, and just there's a difference between, like, people should learn concepts and then learn about things to do with those concepts, because if they learn the thing first, then they end up thinking that that's the only way. And you think, oh, we learn about kings and we learn about empires. I think that they're the normal way, not thinking about democracies. And we think, oh, Athens and Greece was the first democracy of only men, only citizens, and with slaves. And that's a massive problem from all of history, is thinking, oh, but these amazing people, they own slaves, and that was fine, it's okay, because it was at the time. And it's, whereas probably if you've ever owned another person, you should be thought of as that's the core thing that should be known about you. Because then you can have the interesting conversations. Oh yeah, he had slaves and he did this, and have that conversation. That's the important conversation. And finding a way to teach empathy is an important thing that we need as well. Because if you can learn about comfort women and it not completely sicken you to your core and make you feel just horrid and horrified, that's a good thing for the person learning about it, because that's the truth of. And the reason that it's that kind of thing and rape in war is not talked about is because it's about men. It's not about humanity. It's not about, oh, what man can do to his fellow man, like the Holocaust. You can make sense. Anyone can kill someone and go, oh, I didn't really want to, but I felt forced to. You can't force anyone to rape someone. And so there is a part of the male soul that has that in them. And if you were to look into that, that would shatter right into the core of the patriarchy, having those kinds of conversations. And a long way from to talk about philosophy is there's a difference between philosophy is like you can get sick of it, because if someone's really privileged talking about philosophy, it kind of loses its meaning a bit, because when you've got someone who has less privilege, you need tools, you need things to support you now, whereas philosophy it gets to a point where it's just bollocks, I think, but it can have its uses.
Nuance and context are very important, I think, as well, and that's very often lost in school.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that my daughter's been doing geography, and I've been really pleasantly surprised by the things that they've been covering in geography at all levels, actually. And she's done the Democratic Republic of Congo, where they've been talking about the horrendous civil war that's going on there, and the way that the army are keeping the local populations in poverty and sending them down these mines where they're mining the key chemicals that we use and the key minerals that we use for our mobile phones. And they talked about this whole process. So this, and this was in year 7 or 8, or it was early days, and that's a heavy topic, and it's got some big issues there that they were tackling. And I think geography, of all of the subjects, is one of the ones that seems quite intent on tackling those issues, because it also tackles climate change and food issue, supplies chains, and food growth, and population density. So they look at like super cities and the mega cities and the people living in these horrendous conditions. So I think there is slowly a movement towards educating towards a more compassionate system. But I think if the current Conservative government, or what it seems to be morphing into, is allowed to persist after the next elections, then we're going to see that continue to be eroded by them, because their main aim, even at university level, is that the most important thing is that people get their spelling and grammar right. And this is just ridiculous, because as a as an educator myself, a budding educator myself, I feel that the most important thing is that they can get their point of view across. That's the most important thing, that we can communicate. That's what language is for, that we are able to communicate our thoughts and feelings and ideas to other people. It does not matter if we spell it exactly right. It doesn't matter if we get on, and I do think spelling and grammar and all those things are important. I take pride in trying to do that well, but it certainly isn't something that I think we should be penalizing people on, because when we talk about diversity, that's another thing that is it's just taking out a whole group of people that struggle to write legibly or to communicate their thoughts in a way within these very narrow restrictive environments, which is really heavy and big stuff, and just makes me feel a little bit silly for what I'm about to say as my educational games. But I do think that one of the games that my daughter found really helpful was a game called Doodle Maths, and I think they do English as well and some other things now. And it literally could be played on a tablet, it could be played on a phone, it could be played on the computer, and it was a very simple set of lots of little fun maths or English games, and it had this idea of like you do a certain amount each day, and the idea is to keep your streak going, so it had the gamification in there, and it was just it actually did get her practicing her maths, and it got her doing it in much the same way as you were describing earlier, Alex. So I think it's sort of a modern version of that. And the other one is from a sort of maths perspective is Uno, the card game Uno, which I'm sure everyone has come across at some point in their time, and they still play it at school in when there's a pause or there's a wet play or something like that, then they still play that at my daughter's school, because it's a game that again is very accessible. It's very simple rules. It's something that most people can get involved with, and and it's a really good game. And one of my favourite ones, sort of along this line, is a game called Sleeping Queens, which is another card game and is about waking up your sleeping queens, and they have skills to you get to wake them up as the game goes along. But what was really lovely about the game is that the game was designed by a young girl who basically came up with this idea and concepted it and everything, and with the support of her parents managed to make it into a internationally selling card game, and she was in her sort of early teens. And I loved the idea that this game had been designed by a young girl, and it was a sort of it's a bit mathematical and it's a bit tactical, and it's but it's also funny because all the queens look funny, and it's sort of exploding kittens but with queens in a slightly more simple concept. And it's just a quick, fun, easy to pick up game, easy to take with you wherever you go, and it just teaches a lot of skills sort of under the radar without even realizing. So, does anyone have anything they would like to add about educational gaming? We've barely touched on gamification, but it's kind of... And we haven't even mentioned Minecraft.
Very true.
Even though they have a whole educational section of their game. Because cool. It's so... Yeah, you get... If you search up Minecraft, educational Minecraft, they actually have a whole website that's designed specifically for schools. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think having heard your favourite games, Gemma, the child inside me is tempted to go off and try Doodle Maths now. I'm like, I want to see how far I can get. Yeah, it's coming back again. But, yeah, I think I don't have much more to add. I think it's been a really fun discussion.
Thank you.
One other thing I just remembered. I tried to learn touch typing a little while ago, and there was a website which did it's basically small games of it. It sets them up, and you press the keys in terms of lines, and then it gets to a bit where you've got like a ninja hanging from a balloon, and the balloon has a letter on it, and you press the letter, and then the ninja hops to the next one, and it's got another letter, and the balloon starts sinking. Then you have to press that letter before it hits the ground, and then it just keeps on hopping on and hopping on and hopping on like that. And I did that for maybe 2 months, doing it a couple of times a week. And now I can't touch type fluidly, but the way that I interact with my keyboard is better and more efficient, just having done a little bit of that. And it's I'm really interested in anything like tactile, that is like the fine motor skills of just your fingers and hands, because you do so much with them. They're like the most sensitive parts of your body, and gaming is an awesome way to just be interacting with the world through your hands. And touch typing is really, it's a like, so stuff like grammar and spelling, that doesn't matter half as much as being able to get, like you say, get your what you want to know across. And skills like a little bit of typing and maths and philosophy. And one of the biggest things is diversify your input, diversify everything that you consume, because that will not only, it'll improve your life because you'll be entertained by different things. You always need to be pushing out, finding new things, because if you settle for a certain amount of things, what if a number of those things go away? You lose access to those things, and all of a sudden you're dumped with your smaller level of things, where you need different genres of music, different kinds of game, different kinds of podcasts and books and TV shows and all of that. And then that gives you a far better perspective on the world. So if you say, oh, I like shooter games, so I'll only play shooter games. No, you must play RPGs, you must play board games, you must play Guitar Hero. Try all of these things so that you can build up yourself, because that's what the goal of education should be, is finding out what your soul is, and then feeding that and growing from there. And the more we've seized the means of production, and the more content there is out there of every kind, there is a step towards that possible future. And I really believe that. I think it's profoundly important that everyone expand what their inputs are. And I can't understand people who go, oh, I like these 5 things, so I'll just sit with these 5 things. That drives me mad. So if anyone's watching or listening, diversify your inputs.
I think that's right. Variety is the spice of life, and I think what's really clear from this conversation is that education is something that we're very passionate about, and that is very important to us, but also to society and to humanity, really. And I think that's one of the motivating factors for us at Gaming the System, really, isn't it? That we're trying to broaden our minds and the minds of our listeners, and to see the world from different perspectives, and to explore the world in different ways. And I think that is really, really important. And educational games, and games can be educational, I think is really what we've kind of come to the conclusion of. So let's finish it there on that positive note. And thank you so much for you both and your contributions, Matt and Alex.
Thank you, Jen.
And thank you for listening to us and coming along on this journey with us, and hopefully that you will join us for our next podcast. And so we will see you very soon. Thank you.
Bye.